He's delivered over 4,000 babies. And a 12-term congressman from Texas. For 40 years, he's been standing up for the Constitution, sometimes casting that lone vote on Capitol Hill. He's never voted to raise taxes, and he's never voted to increase the scope of government. Now, I'd like to introduce my personal hero, the embodiment of all that is honorable in American tradition, Dr. Ron Paul.
And I appreciate everybody being here tonight for this wonderful, wonderful reception. And I also would like to have my family stand up. A few of them are sitting down here. Also my little son Ronnie's there, but I'm not supposed to tell you what university he graduated from. His wife Peggy, I'm allowed to tell you about where she graduated. She has an engineering degree from where is that again? Her oldest daughter is with us tonight, and that's Laura, and she also is getting her MD degree. And her husband now is a graduate from A&M as well. And we have a granddaughter, Valerie. and of course, we forget about Linda. I think Linda, everybody knows who Linda is. Linda's over there. But Valerie and her daughter, Caroline. But anyway, I am so glad to be here. I'm so glad to hear the enthusiasm. Every day I get asked 3 or 4 times about why do young people care about you? I said, well, maybe young people care about liberty. So when young people are enthusiastic about that issue, I'm enthusiastic. It encourages me. I hope I can encourage you to fight the battle for the restoration of freedom in this country. One thing that comes up quite frequently is the foreign policy issue and how the campaign is going. But one thing I've been very proud of in the campaign has been the support I get from the military. If you add up the donations that all the other candidates get versus the donations I get and our campaign gets from active military duty, we get more than all the rest put together. Should send a good signal about what this message is all about. And also, it happens to be that for some time now, I have been the only candidate that is actually a veteran of the military service. I served 5 years in the U.S. Air Force, some on active duty and some in the reserves during the 1960s. There was a crisis in October of 1962 that happened to involve the missiles in Cuba. That's when I was called up. But that was resolved rather soon. I was in during the period of time when the Vietnam War was going on. I did not have to go to Vietnam. So I was very much aware of that war and probably helped influence me on some of my foreign policy views. But my big concern is the cause of liberty and what is happening. I believe we're moving in the wrong direction, that we're approaching a time where we have very little liberty and we have too much tyranny, too much domination, too many rules, too many laws. We have a country that has 5% of all the people in the world. But for some reason or other, we have 25% of all the prisoners. And I don't believe the American people are that bad. I think we have way too many laws on the books. And just on January 1st of this year, there were 40,000 new laws put on the books in one day because of all the laws. And I would like to be the first president to get rid of 40,000 laws. No one person can comprehend or understand what's in the Federal Register. All we know is it's growing and growing, and you can always get into trouble because it's incomprehensible. But we should shrink the size of the Federal Register. We should not expand the size of the Federal Register. It also means that we have to curtail the power of government to write these laws. And all these, the Constitution is relatively clear. Matter of fact, very clear about who's supposed to write the laws. It's supposed to be the U.S. Congress. The Congress is supposed to write the laws and signed by the President. But today we live in an age when if the Congress moves slowly, we have a current president said not too long ago, he says, well, Congress is moving too slowly. I'll just write an executive order, and that will be the law of the land. And as we all know, that should be unconstitutional, but executive orders have been used for a long, long time. That policy ought to change. But even writing regulations is technically not constitutional. Regulation is the force of law. Congress writes a broad law, and then they dump it in the executive branch. The executive branch and the bureaucrats misinterpret or overinterpret and writes thousands of regulations that come out of the laws, and that is where the real problem is. What it does, it undermines liberty, it undermines the free market, it undermines our property rights. So it's out of hand, and we can solve these problems. We're in an economic mess. We have a lot of problems going on. I think the number one cause of the problems we have today is the fact that we have not had enough people in Washington who took their oath of office seriously and obeyed the Constitution. I've often wondered about how countries get themselves into trouble. They're a free country, then before they know it, they have a tyrant in charge. And we're drifting in the wrong direction as far as I'm concerned. I read a book recently written by Martin Mayer, and he wrote it in 1955. I just came across it and read it recently, but he was analyzing how the German people lost their freedom and accepted fascism. And he went back and studied this, and his title of his book is They Thought They Were Free. And his analysis was rather profound, because a lot of them didn't realize it, that they were losing their freedoms. Matter of fact, the first 5 years of the fascism of Nazi Germany was well received. The people loved it. It wasn't like Hitler came into power because he came in with force and took over the government. He was supported by the people, and even for the first 5 years, things were improved. But they had changed some fundamentals. They got too close to mixing business and big government and sacrificed incrementally their liberties. And before they knew it, the last 5-7 years turned into a monster. And of course, that's what we remember it by. But it was the author of that book said it was incrementalism, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And I think that's what's been happening to us. There's an old saying about if you put a frog into boiling water, it'll jump right out. But if you put a frog into cool water and gradually heat it, the frog won't jump out and will actually kill the frog. And I think that's a good analogy about what happens to a nation. And I think we've been sitting in this cool water that's heating up, and we better jump out real soon if we want to restore our liberty. The problem of governments coming along and gradually usurping the liberties that the people this fable. The fisherman comes along and runs into a bird that didn't want to go looking for worms and makes a deal with the fisherman. He says, I'd like to have one of the worms. And the fisherman says, sure, I'll give you a worm, you give me a feather. And that made both of them happy. The next day the same thing happened. Each day the bird lost a feather. Before the bird knew about it, he couldn't hunt anymore. He couldn't go out and get worms for himself. So he was really desperate to get this worms from the fisherman. So the fisherman comes in, and on the last day that this was going on, he said, well, I'd like to have another worm, but I don't have any more feathers. And the fisherman said, fine and dandy. So now that the chicken had been plucked, the chicken was fat and lazy, couldn't defend itself, the fisherman picked up the bird and cooked the bird, and that was the end of it. What we have to do is realize that if we're fat and lazy and think government's going to take care of ourselves, it doesn't work. Matter of fact, what generally happens is we don't get too fat and lazy. Eventually, the people get starved for their liberties, and starved in the sense that productivity goes down. That's what's happened to our society today. Productivity is down, and what are we giving the young people of this country? Are we giving them a good job in order to pay off this massive debt and student debt? No, what we give them is they end up with a lot of debt. What this country and our monetary system is all based on debt. Debt, we're in a worldwide debt crisis. It's the biggest in the history of the world, and we orchestrated this through the dollar reserve standard. And it won't last. It's coming to an end, and we have to realize this, that we cannot continue to do this. This is the reason that I make a suggestion that if and when elected president, of deficit financing, I want to cut the budget $1 trillion in 1 year. Now, the other candidates and the Republican leadership in Congress, they talk about cutting back and balancing the budget, and they've been doing that for a long time, and we've had opportunities where we've had the House and the Senate and the presidency, but the deficits continue to grow, and they have not shrunk. They either didn't know what to do or they weren't serious. I think it's a very, very serious problem. Now today, we have an alternative budget to the president, and I'm not too excited about it. It wants to balance the budget in 30 years. I don't think that's not soon enough. And it won't last. The economy is not going to hold together by spending. We're running up a deficit of $1.5 trillion per year. The national debt is $16 trillion. We have a foreign debt, which is the biggest in the history of the world. And we just can't continue to do this. We have undermined the productive capacity of this country. At the same time, we have not curtailed any of our spending. So it's time for us to wake up, get our head out of the sand, and decide to face up to the facts of life. The government spends way too much money, and it should be cut in their spending habits. A lot of people get nervous when I talk about cutting $1 trillion, saying, oh, won't that crash the economy? I said, why would that crash the economy if the people get to spend $1 trillion instead of the bureaucrats and the politicians? Woo! It's not so much that the spending won't occur, it's just who makes those decisions. And I've been in Washington for a couple of years, and I've met a few politicians, I've met a few bureaucrats. And let me tell you, they're not smart enough to know how to spend your money. Besides, it's a moral issue as well as an economic and constitutional issue for me, because I believe that our rights come from our Creator.
Amen.
So if our lives come from our Creator and our liberties come from our Creator in a natural way, why would it follow that if you have your right to your life and your liberty, why shouldn't you have the right to keep the fruits of your labor?
Right.